how's that for a slice of fried gold? Okay, so it's going to be my great pleasure to bring out the folks responsible for this film and to ask them a couple of questions, and then I'm going to throw it out to the audience, and I see no reason why we shouldn't start this right now. So please, again, put your hands together for Edgar Wright, Simon Pegg, and Mr. Nick Frost. Thank you very much.
Hello. Did you enjoy it?
This is an absolutely fucking incredible movie. Okay. It's got, I mean, it's funny.
It's got the EW quote. For the
yes, that is. I mean, it's funny. It's got, you know, it's sci-fi. It's got heart. It's about serious things. Nick, maybe I can start with you. So, how much would it cost me to walk out with a cardigan like yours?
Oh well, I mean, obviously this one would run into the tens of thousands of dollars. But if you look at my site, my website, nick@cardigans.org, we do them in a bunch of colours too, but for as little as $29.99.
But seriously, I've had the pleasure of watching this a couple of times now, and there are so many things I picked up the second time that maybe people don't the first. Any chance you could run through a couple of those, or things that I can stop talking now?
I don't know. I mean, we were talking a bit about it in the Shaun of the Day Q&A earlier, but we like kind of putting lots of foreshadowing in the first like 30 minutes. You know, in the bit that's the non-sci-fi part, there's lots of kind of like setup. So I'll let Simon reel off a couple of them in a second. But you know, like the opening kind of like 5 minutes, the 1990 prologue, pretty much kind of like predicts exactly what's going to happen in the movie. Even where Martin Freeman's character kind of comes out, like where he vomits in like the prologue is pretty much the same point where he becomes like a blank in later in the film. But he goes out in the park, even just down to you know, like prefiguring you know, Mr. Shepherd and like the sort of the marmalade sandwich and the sort of the exact order of things. But then we, you know, like the other big obvious thing is even like things like in the opening sequence, like the first thing you hear about Mr. Shepherd, Pierce Brosnan's character, is like he's definitely one of the good guys, which he isn't later on. Or like with Martin Freeman's character, they say Oliver thought he was a player, but really he was all mouth. And then for the rest of the movie, he's pretty much. So we like having these things like to predict people's fates and stuff. And the same thing with the names of the pubs. Simon Pegg.
Thank you again. All the names of the pubs and all the signs, all the pub signs are like tarot cards that tell you what's going to happen inside them. So when you look at the pub signs, each one of them has some indication of what occurs within. And the pubs themselves all do the same. The first post is the first pub they go into. The Old Familiar looks exactly the same as the first post. The Famous Cock is where Gary is thrown out for being a famous cock. Cross Hands is where they first cross hands with the blanks and they have their first fight. The Good Companions is where they all pretend to be friends, and the sign is like four unhappy faces and one big happy face in the middle, which is Gary, obviously. The Trusty Servant is where they meet the Reverend Green, who is now a servant of the sort of network. He's sort of collaborating with them. The Two-Headed Dog is the twins, obviously, that they fight in the garden. The Mermaid is the marmalade sandwich. They're mermaids, the sirens that sort of are there to tempt us.
On the sign as well.
On the sign, the two blonde
mermaids and the redhead in the middle as well.
The Beehive is where the big hive of activity is, where the big sort of the network congregate to try and convert them in the scene with Mr. Shepherd. The Beehive, the King's Head is Gary's mind. That's where he decides to finally complete the crawl no matter what. And the pub sign is actually my face. The Hole in the Wall is an obvious one because Steve drives the beast through the wall. And the World's End is where the world ends. So there you go. That's all the kind of.
This film comes out on Friday. Don't go straight onto Twitter and ruin all the surprises. What you should do is on Friday, take somebody who hasn't seen it, go for a drink afterwards and say, hey, did you notice how all the pub signs you know, prefigure the film? Oh, like what? And then just reel that off. And you will get laid.
We did.
With each other.
shit.
So I don't think we need to spend more than 20 or 30 minutes reminding people that we grew up in the same village again. But this was actually, it's partly inspired by you filming Hot Fuzz in Wales, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I said in the intro, like I did do a pub crawl in my hometown when I was 19, and that was the start of the inspiration for it. Is that I wrote a script when I was 21 about teenagers on a pub crawl, which I never did anything with. And then when we were promoting Hot Fuzz, I started to think, and it was sort of, partly based on the filming Hot Fuzz, but I started to think, well, maybe there's something about older guys trying to recreate their teenage years. And but then another thing, and I remember telling Simon about that, and very quickly, we were in an airport, we were out on a plane from like Sydney to Wellington during the Hot Fuzz press tour. We immediately started kind of hashing out the whole story, including the invasion. But one of the things about Hot Fuzz, like me and Simon are both from small towns and moved to London, and it's always bittersweet going back because you sort of realise, like how little impact you've had on your hometown, and how like it's changing without you, and it's not so much that you never left, it's like you were never there, So a lot of the things in the movie, I kind of felt when I would go back is that publican, like bartenders didn't recognise me anymore, like sort of that whole thing with a bully is something that kind of genuinely happened, but there was something that happened on Hot Fuzz that sort of stuck in my head was that we shot in Wales. And in the script of Hot Fuzz, it's supposed to be very idyllic and timeless and beautiful. And yet, when we were shooting the scene where he's riding up the street on the horse, there was a Starbucks right in the middle of the shot that hadn't previously been there before, and we had to digitally erase that Starbucks to make it seem like it was like the beautiful town. So little things like that just stuck in my head in terms of this my hometown is becoming part of the city.
Yeah, so this film is an apology to Starbucks, because we drink that shit all the time.
Okay, let's throw it out to the audience. Who has a question?
You just have to shout, because there's no mic.
Put your hands up.
Yes, up here.
Yeah, so, love all your films, and I think funniest things I've ever seen. I just wondered, how do you go through the film and then pick your right moments for getting the comedy? Do you take a lot of different takes and then when you're editing kind of put them all together, or you just ad-lib on set?
There's kind of like zero improv on set, really. Like me and Simon write the screenplay. Nick is one of the first people to read it, and so that he gives his notes. But really, any of that kind of other stuff comes in. We do rehearsal with the actors, and some funny lines that come out of that get put into the script. But maybe less than 5% of the screenplay. The screenplay that we wrote is very similar to what we do on screen. So we don't really do any improv, because the scenes are very rapid fire and they kind of have beginnings, middle, and ends. And I think in sort of comedies where you improv, even the greatest kind of form of that, something like Curb Your Enthusiasm, which is fully improvised, is usually based around different arguments or tensions and stuff. And so, but with this is we write a screenplay, and then if it feels like it's natural and improv, it's because these two are amazing actors.
You creep. Kidding. We try and get all that stuff out of the way early, and so that when we hit the ground, Edgar runs a tight ship, and he has, the one thing that's amazing about Edgar is he will have the whole film in his head, and he knows exactly how scenes merge into other scenes, all the segues, all the transitions, it's all bubbling away in his head. And so if you mess around with any of the kind of the joins, it fucks the whole thing up. So we have to come to set with our screenplay kind of carved into a stone tablet and abide by it. Occasionally things will, come up, silly little things that we'll chuck in, but generally speaking it's, and then it's up to Edgar in the edit to review all the takes of every single shot. Well, you make a note of it. If you're going to do a good take on the day, you make a note of it so you don't have to trawl through everything. But there are a couple of things that I remember, a couple of takes of certain scenes that I asked Edgar to review and consider because I felt they'd gone well, but otherwise I tend to stay out of it during the edit. Nick, what's your opinion on all this stuff?
Yeah, I stay out of it. I'd come and I was very, I'm probably on the north of it, so it's outside Edgar.
Thanks, Nick.
You do give some I say Nick gives notes on the script and you sprinkle your magic frost dust on it. Wouldn't that be right?
Yeah, I do. Although it's not frost dust. Dried sperm.
For example, I'm going to be serious about. For example, I'm going to be serious about your craft, Nick Ross. But like, for example, a note that Nick gives us about his character from the first draft had a major impact on the film. He sort of said maybe his wife has left him. So even just that one suggestion is like, that's a great idea, and then that becomes an entire arc for that character. Like, so you know, that's a big contribution to the script.
Yeah, we were struggling slightly with the idea that Andy would go in at all, you know, and we like this idea that maybe there was a reason he went, was because he really had nothing else to do, you know, his missus had gone, which kind of helps. So thanks for that, mate.
You're welcome. That's free. I can't drop the microphone thing. I'm so sorry, but this has got a 3 on it, and that's got a 4 in it. So where are 1 and 2? Where are 1 and 2? It's driving me mad.
You can't throw in little comments when you want to, can you?
No.
Another question. Yes, here.
How long did it take the movie? How long did it take to make
this back?
12 weeks.
to shoot? 12 weeks.
Yes, sir. Let's stand.
Hi. First of all, thank you so much for coming and doing this.
Thank you, nice being here.
It was really great. I was one of the people standing out who hadn't bought a ticket before, and I can't believe I actually made it here. So it's really awesome.
Security came out.
I don't want to be alienated by saying that, but I had 2 questions. First of all, both.
Yeah, you're getting free and you want 2 questions.
I'm seizing this opportunity. First of all, both in Shaun of the Dead and this, there seems to be a very compassionate ending for the enemy. They both kind of get incorporated back into society, and I was wondering if you could speak to that. If you know, because you know, most zombie movies you see, you know, the good guys die, or you know.
Well, I think at the end of this one, we feel like the blanks are orphans. It's like their boss like fucked up, and we feel sorry for them as they woke back up and they don't have a dad anymore. So we kind of like feel sorry for them. And I think in a way that's why Gary gravitates towards like the outsiders. That the blanks are now on the outside, and he's going to become the king of the rebels, because like it's like sort of Bill Nye, their dad just fucked off into the universe and left them all behind. Poor robots. So we do have compassion for them.
We also wanted the network to be an interesting proposition in that it wasn't necessarily a bad thing. It might actually be a good thing to go along with the network. Maybe we should be guided. Maybe we should give over to a higher power. You know, maybe our own free will isn't worth the shit we cause for each other. You know, and so we wanted people to walk away thinking they do the right thing. Then, right? You know, telling the network to F off. But you know, with Gary and his blank, you know, basically in the end, Gary gets to. We love the idea of Gary living out the rest of his life with his young friends, like he kind of wanted to. You know, Gary ends up getting his wish. He ends up living in the past with his young friends. But because he's happy, he's not drinking anymore. That's why he's drinking water. And that's another prefiguring moment where Andy says to Gary earlier on, do you know how difficult it is to walk into a bar full of ugly bastards wearing war paint and order 5 waters, which is exactly what he does at the end of the film. And it's because he's happy now, you know. And yeah, he's hanging out with the blanks, but for him, it's kind of what he always wanted, was just to be with his friends, you know. So that's and that was one of those endings, in the same way that we had Sean and Ed living in the shed together before we wrote the bulk of Shaun of the Dead. We had that moment, didn't we?
Yeah.
We were trying to figure out how to do it at first. Before we came up with the idea for the network, we were thinking time travel maybe, or...
Yeah, we always wanted Gary to end up with his teenage friends, and then the idea of him, like, you know, because he's already like ripped the head off his youngest outfit. It's like, oh, but the other 4 are still around. The original name for the network was the iCloud, but it turns out it was taken. The cloud scares me. I don't like it.
We did a screening. We literally did a screening for Apple employees in Cupertino, and afterwards had to kind of say, "You must be so chuffed that we thought your technology was so good it could only have been invented by aliens." And they bought it, which was nice.
Yes. Up here, perhaps? I think it's a hand.
This is for Simon and Nick.
Sure.
What was it like having to fight your best friend?
To fight, it was fun. It was good. We have a long history of fighting. We've had battles that have ended in quite serious wounds, haven't we?
Yeah,
What have
we.
we done?
Simon and I were drunk one night. We drank a bottle of sherry each, and we were stripped to the waist, wrestling in my bedroom. Now, bear in mind, we had like a house full of people as guests. The 2 of us just saw it necessary just to split off to wrestle, and so I kind of got Simon into a position where I could essentially give him a giant atomic power bomb onto my bed, which I did, and it was so powerful that the bed exploded. And then as I stood up, my thumb was hanging off, really long and loose.
He said, does your thumb do this? And he pushed it. And I was like, no?
But the flip side to that story, yes, he stabbed me in the hand once with a knife. The flip side to that story is everyone ran in, didn't they, from the front room to see what the commotion, smashing noise was, and then everyone started to kind of get in and try and, you know, put my bed back together again. And I was saying, no, leave it, it's fine, just leave it, just fucking leave it, will you? Just leave it. And then when they lifted the bed up, it unearthed a giant IKEA bag full of porn. Which was terribly embarrassing.
These were in the print media days before X-Hamster, right?
Yeah. There was a lot of varied stuff,
dying out,
a
a lot of Euro stuff, some interesting titles. Some I hadn't seen before, to be honest. Peggy. He's not Peggy.
Like it all.
We gave the whole bag to a runner who worked on a show that Nick was working on. He was about 21 years old. And we basically gave a 21-year-old boy, an IKEA bag full of pornography.
I think it was...
We waved them off.
I looked for a
buyer.
host, for a buyer for many years. I wanted to keep the collection intact and together.
So yeah, well, some people wanted to buy odd titles, he wanted to keep it all.
Now, the addendum to that story is that young man went blind.
We were just waving him off as he disappeared, just going, he is gonna fucking die.
Yes. Just here.
Okay.
One fucking awesome. I loved it. It was
Thank you
wonderful.
very much.
Who was your fight choreographer, and how long did it take to get? I mean, it was beautiful. The sequences were wonderful. How long did it take you to get it so tight?
Who was our fight choreographer?
The fight choreographer was a man named Brad Allen, who I worked with on Scott Pilgrim. He's an Australian stunt choreographer, and but he's an Australian choreographer who is like the first like Caucasian man to be on Jackie Chan's fight team. He was like sort of like went from Australia, went to Shanghai, trained with Jackie, and became one of like Jackie's team. And so like and Guillermo del Toro worked with him on Hellboy 2, and he recommended him to me for Scott Pilgrim. I thought he was amazing. And then on this, it's like it's pretty much the same crew as like Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, except for Bill Pope, the cinematographer of Scott Pilgrim, and Brad Allen, the choreographer. So one American, one like Australian, they came to London and did the film. And what was great on this one is that like we couldn't really afford to fly in like sort of stuntmen from like sort of Shanghai and like sort of all over like we had on Scott Pilgrim. So Brad actually worked with like English stunt team. There's another guy who, if you see his YouTube videos, just remember the name Damien Walters. If you've already seen some of his YouTube videos, they have like 13 million hits. He's just astonishing.
He's got 20 million hits now on his 2011 showreel. Just try and remember Damien Walters' showreel 2011. It's insane.
So they came on board, and one of the things was we wanted to make these fights feel really real. And part of that was like evaluating the cast, what they can do, and then like what they can do, and then the fact that Simon.
Well, what we couldn't do.
Yeah, the fact that everybody could do the choreography meant that we could do it in these long, uninterrupted takes. So that was the idea, is that, you know, one of the things, when you watch action films and like you can't tell what's going on, it's usually because the shaky camera work or the big wide shots are hiding a stunt double, or the fact that the actor can't do it or doesn't want to do it. And what was great with this is that everybody was really game, and then like we could design these fights to kind of without cuts, you know, and to never really show the baddies, to focus on them. So tell us about the training, guys.
Well, also, often in action sequences in any film, when the action kicks in and the stunt team take over, the characters fall away because the stunt team aren't actors. You know, all they're doing is the physicality, and so the character side of the characters drops away. And we really didn't want that to happen. We wanted to maintain characters. So, you know, Gary fights one-handed because he's protecting his pint, because he cares about it more than his face. And he has the big berserker rage with the stools, and you know, Steve's throwing these big haymakers, and Oliver's wriggling out of everything. It's Pete's hiding. It was keep the characters during the fights, and the fights will feel more alive, and they did, I think. Talk about
Oh, right. Yeah, well, we trained for 4 weeks, which was a lot of fun, and we'd come in and, Brad and the team would have put like an amazing previs together on their laptops. We fighting with cardboard weapons, and they kind of built the set out of cardboard, and they'd come in and say, this is what we're going to do today. And it's amazing how similar it is to the finished thing. But there was only a couple of things they wouldn't let us do, right? They wouldn't let me dive through a sugar glass window, and I think that was because they were worried about me contracting type 2 diabetes. A very real threat. It is a real threat when you're a big fella or woman. But it was fun. It's fun to go to work and you get to punch people all day. It's a great treat. And
You did the dancing thing.
I did. I was very lucky that a week before we started this, I wrapped a film where I had trained for 7 months to become a salsa dancer. So in terms of learning vast choreographies, my brain was ready to go, and I'm a natural puncher. So the two of them together, it was like a dream job for me. It was wonderful.
What would you call the bar stools?
Hulk hands. They were like big, beautiful Hulk hands. And that's where I got my nickname for Pink Hulk. So when I tear this cardigan off, $29.99, that I became Pink Hulk. I think that was one of the only things I came to at one point and said, because I think in the original draft of the script and in some of the storyboards, when I ripped my cardigan off, it was the whole thing came off. So I was kind of essentially topless. And it was very cold that winter, and I kind of said to Edgar, can I just rip my cardigan off? That would be quite funny, wouldn't it? Because I've quite a lot of tattoos, and it takes a lot of time to cover them up. I think originally I said to you, if I have to rip my shirt off, instead of covering my tattoos up, can I have like a vest of tattoos? Something that's like, Andy is like, he has a complete body suit. Yeah, exactly.
The other thing that's interesting about the action is that we try to find like stunt people who weren't the usual type in terms of like, usually in action scenes, if you spot like a big like muscly waiter, you know that man is going to go through a coffee table or like through a door. It's like sort of that's obvious, that's stunt man. And the scene in the bathroom with the kids, like I asked Brad Allen, we'd done this scene in Hot Fuzz that we cut out where Simon beats up some hoodies, and it didn't really work. And this time around we'd written the scene, and I said to Brad, I said, can we find stuntmen that are teenagers? And he said, absolutely. He said, like circus schools, gymnasts, tumblers, martial artists.
What you actually said was, get me some teenagers. First, it was awkward. It was very awkward. They talked it out.
And then he like brought out this big blue IKEA bag. Anyway, serious part of it. So, the kids in the bathroom scene are from the ages of 15 to 20, and they are never doubled in the whole scene. So that whole fight is done by these teenagers. They're not even stunt men, they're stunt boys. Yeah. So like Greg Townley, who's the first guy who gets his kind of like cap hit off and then like gets decapitated, he is 15 years old. And when he was 12, he was claiming the rest of his stunt double in Kick-Ass as Hit Girl. So he was like a 12-year-old boy in Hit Girl's dress playing Hit Girl. So it was just amazing because we kind of like sort of like these, I mean, like tell them about like Sam.
Oh yeah, the guy that I'm going to say the little kid I fought in the bathroom fight, like Brad, and there was that scene where that tiny piece where he kicks me in the liver, and Brad said, "You want a pad for this?" I said, "No, look, he's tiny. I don't want a pad. Look at the size of me. I'm fine. It's fine." And then after kind of 4 or 5 takes, and I could taste blood in my mouth, but then I didn't want to back down and say to Brad, "Yeah, I can't." So yeah, I think
with a pillowcase full of oranges.
yeah, it was terrible. It hurt so much. But then it was only a bit later that I found out that he was 19, and he was like a champ. It was a champion, and I bruised my liver, and I couldn't sleep for 4 days. I couldn't sleep on my front, and horrible taste of bile in my mouth. But yeah, I think I learned something that day, and that was don't get kicked in the guts by a champion.
But it's just, I mean, the other scenes worth pointing out in terms of that is the scene with the twins. They were not stunt women, they were dancers. And it's because I had to find identical twins. There wasn't any like identical twin stunt women. So it's like, well, let's find some dancers. And then they could do the lines, and they were really, I thought they did an amazing job, and it's like they'd never been in a film before, they'd never acted before, and they'd certainly never done a fight scene before. But it's like, okay, don't worry, we're going to train you up. So they learn the choreography, and then, you know, Kelly and Stacey, they do that entire fight scene, which is amazing, you know. So that to me was like something that was really kind of fun, is like going outside the normal pool of like stunt people.
Thanks, Edgar. Thanks. Who's next?
Right up in the corner.
Thanks. All right, so first off, I want to say that the rave episode and the big fight episode of Space, I think are perfect episodes of television.
Oh,
And I rewatched
thank
them.
you. Thank you very much.
But I guess I have a question. Simon kind of touched on it before, maybe. That when you're writing your movies, are you simply aiming to entertain, or are there any like life philosophies you try to espouse?
Well, yeah. all of the three films are saying very human things about humanity, or ourselves, or whatever. You know, the big drama tropes that we adopt, we're not so much concerned with them as what they enable us to say about other things. Do you know what I mean? I think science fiction particularly has lost its way recently. People got distracted by the robots. It was never about the robots. It was about us. You know, if you show me two robots having a fight in the street, I'm fucking bored after a minute. You know, what's important is that it's saying something about who we are as people, or how we relate to each other, or
And also,
whatever.
like, you know, the robots sort of represent his fear of growing up and his fear of losing his identity. You know?
Yeah, they also represent the fact that they're regressing into childhood and they fall apart like action figures. You know, it's like they cover them in blue ink, which is like when you're at school and you get pen all over your face, and they fall apart like toys. You know, and so for us, the robots were partly a class thing. They were partly because of the network, the whole homogenization of the high street, the whole homogenization of the galaxy kind of thing. There was a lot going on, you know, and also there's a lot to be said in The World's End about, you know, not just that, but about alcoholism and you know, Gary's sort of terminal desire to continue to drink. You know, that is actually quite a tragic story, that he puts it ahead of the friends of his life, in his friends' lives. You know, and that's kind of what alcoholics do. You know, they only think of their next drink, and it's a terrible situation to be in. So there are deep, serious things going on in the films. It's just they're really funny and silly as well.
Well, I think it's also that, you know, in all of the films, and that's why we wanted to make it like the central theme is about the idea of perpetual adolescence, is how long can Arrested Development go on for, and you've got a movie where four of them have grown up.
Netflix did another series, isn't there? Mike?
You know, the idea that like the four of them are grown ups and the other one not only is like not an adult, he wants to be 18 again. So like he's not just kind of like sort of being a big kid, he wants to go backwards. So we thought like sort of all of these things, like these themes that sort of obsess us all came like crashing together, and the sci-fi element is a manifestation of their fears. So there are like, the thing is, it is a sci-fi comedy, and like, you know, like if you just watch the trailer, it's like sort of, you know, got funny, got pratfalls and action and special effects. But you know, like in a way, like we sort of realised with the three films is that we're sort of like, they're like Trojan horses, so you can like smuggle this relationship comedy in, like with some maybe some deeper material, and like that might not be something that you think about straight away. It might kind of like, you know, like hit you like, you know, a couple of days later. But as long as it makes you think just a little bit, that's good.
We like to think it's Pacific Rim Jaeger piloted by Ken Loach and Mike Lee. That's what we think this film is. Can we have a question from up here so I can uncrick my neck? Yes. No. Yeah, no, you. I'm joking. Yeah, you. Come on.
Okay. This is kind of just a correct me if I'm wrong thing, but I was wondering about the origin of the marmalade sandwich, and if maybe somebody saw the three of you sitting exactly like you are now.
With
like a lemon curd sandwich.
I think, you know what's funny? I remember we went through that idea of it being a sandwich, and very strangely, the first thing that I came up with was way too obscure, because I used to like eat like sort of red Leicester sandwiches. It's like, oh, like a cheese and jam sandwich, and then like something, they're like a marmalade sandwich. Of course, you know.
I think this would be more like cheddar on brown, which is, I'd say pumpernickel. Cheddar on pumpernickel, which is weirdly what my new album is called. Which is out on Monday. Yeah, no, that was it. We just wanted we wanted to come up with a collective noun for the three girls, you know, and one of those things that, you know, a stupid thing, and a crass thing you'd make up as a, you know, somewhat sexist thing as a teenage boy, and make them, objectify them in that way so that, you know, we could refer to them as one.
What about this man with the glasses in the middle?
What led you to the decision to like kind of switch roles rather than having like he was the responsible kind of, you know, suit and tie type and he was the kind of willy-nilly type?
I think it's what the story necessitates.
Willy-nilly.
Funny enough, he's playing the character of
It's like
willy-nilly. He's playing willy-nilly in the next film. No, it was because the story necessitated it. You know, Gary needed to be the child in this, and because he literally is, you know, mentally a child, at least or an adolescent. And in Shaun of the Dead, Shaun is the adult and Ed is the child, and in Hot Fuzz, Nicholas Angel is the adult and Danny is the child. So the dynamics are similar, even though the characters are wildly different. You know, Danny and Ed are poles apart from each other. They're very, very different characters, as are Shaun and Nicholas Angel, but the dynamic is similar. And this just necessitated us having, you know, Gary be the proactive sort of catalyst of all the mayhem, and sort of Andy be his critic and react to it. So it was the story that did that, wasn't it, Nick? Yeah. You, quick hands.
So, I've seen all three movies today. Really great to see them all in a row.
I'm kidding, I'm playing it.
My question after all that is for Nick. In your Pacific Rim metaphor, where these movies are a Jaeger, what would the kaiju be?
Oh, now you
I haven't seen it, but yeah, I don't know. Starbucks, homogenization, sloth, apathy, cardigan. No!
Let's have a non-Pacific Rim question. Lady, yeah. I think Hot Fuzz is slightly different in terms of like, but it's sort of about kind of just finding like your right kind of like level in life. If there's you know, like Shaun needs to grow up. He's like sort of lazy and complacent, and he lets his kind of lovely girlfriend walk away, and he kind of needs a slap. And it's like in that he has a choice of like, do you want to be like Ed the stoner, or do you want to be like more like Pete, who's a professional? Like in Hot Fuzz, you know, like it's like Danny's the one that needs to grow up and kind of be a bit more realistic, and like sort of Nicholas is the one who kind of almost needs to dumb down, and like they need to meet to be the perfect buddies. They need to meet somewhere in the middle. You know, this one is something like that we thought we'd sort of take the sort of the Shaun problem and have somebody that actually runs in the other direction. Like Gary wants to turn back the clock, and he wants nothing more to be 18 again. He cannot handle the idea of being 40, and so his only option is to use like booze as a time machine to regress his friends to being juvenile. Because when you get drunk, you get kind of childish again. So it's almost like, you know, he's using the sort of, there's a number of reasons why he wants to go on this pub crawl. One of the reasons is to get his friends drunk, so like he will kind of be in charge and be there. He just wants to be the leader of the pack again. And when he realizes he can't, you know, the thing is that just before the scene in the bathroom where the sci-fi element kicks off, like there's been a sort of the first intervention in the film. It's like Gary has escaped from therapy. He's triggered his own intervention from his friends, and they all like tell him some hard truths. And his reaction is to say, like, you're jealous, like, because I'm free and you're all slaves. And then you find out that robot means slave, so he's accusing them of being robots, and then they meet some real robots. But it's just the idea of like sort of like the more of a like a cautionary tale is like sort of like Shaun needs to grow up. Gary doesn't want to grow up, and his action is to turn the clock back, and then it turns into a disaster from there.
It's also the old Hegelian dialectic of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, in that Shaun is lack of motivation, Nicholas Angel is over-motivation, and the synthesis of those two things are a highly motivated slacker, in that he is desperate suicide mission. So, and also you could say that I used to be a film student, by the way. Talking shit. Also, I like to think that Shaun of the Dead is about evolution, and Hot Fuzz is about devolution, and this one, The World's End, is about revolution. Because in Shaun of the Dead he has to evolve, and in the Hot Fuzz, Nicholas Angel has to devolve to become the hero at the end, and in this film it's about the guys revolting against this homogenizing force. And all these things would stand up in an essay, even though I'm essentially talking a lot of rubbish.
When you take your friend who hasn't seen the film yet out on Friday, say, you notice that Shaun of the Dead is...
You're going to get so much sex next weekend.
These are all good things to bring out.
Let's have a couple more. I think you guys have had long enough in this place, as lovely as it is.
The fellow up there with the yellow.
Who's that out there?
Give him it. We flippantly denied you, sir, with a yellow shirt on and heavy white hair.
You? Yeah.
Yeah.
Who grew up with dyeing Simon's hair black?
That was me, I guess. Because, well, we both wanted Gary to be sort of... he was a goth when he was a kid, but also for Gary, conveniently dyeing his hair black meant that he can...
Never age.
Never age.
He's probably grey underneath.
He's very grey underneath. We had this idea that Gary might not have just been wearing those clothes for 20 years. It's like he's like a US Army general who puts his uniform on to commit suicide. He's sort of pulled all that stuff on specifically to go on what might be his last ever mission. You know, he doesn't really have any plans beyond that night. He doesn't really know if he's going to come back. He's already tried to kill himself. And this is the awful dark heart of this film, is that Gary is essentially literally on his last hurrah. And so he has donned this uniform of his youth, and part of that is his black hair, which I absolutely loved having, believe me.
You at one point were thinking about a wig, and I said, no, you're going to dye it. You're going to dye it.
Absolutely, you're right, and you were right to tell me to do that.
Funny enough, when we did some of the photos that we looked at of like sort of both goth kind of artists and like some punk stars. It was like a bit of Andrew Eldridge from Sisters of Mercy, but also early Dave Vanian from The Damned. Like before he had his white streak, he used to have that kind of like his hair like really slicked back, like the lead singer of The Damned. So we would go onto Google Images and look up pictures of him and Murphy from Bauhaus.
At the end, that's all Andrew Eldridge, and this is the Mercy when I've got the big hat on and stuff, and the coat and the glasses. That's my. And I was so thrilled when I found out that Andrew Eldridge liked our films and gave us the permission to use the Sisters of Mercy music and the tattoo and the T-shirt. It meant so much to me because I was such a gigantic fan of the Sisters of Mercy that it was like a childhood dream come true.
The whole thing at the end, we like the idea that like Gary, has become like sort of part of his own like goth pop video dream at the end. And what's funny is like sort of that kind of post-apocalypse thing is that Eric Fellner, the executive producer and who runs Working Title, he got his start making all of the Duran Duran videos. And I remember one day on set, I said to Eric, you know what we've gone and done? He goes, what? He goes, we've just made the prequel to Wild Boys. One more great question.
You've been a long time, sir, with the cap here at the front.
You guys kind of became like a comedic trio with Spaced, and after that you kind of all went into film. So I was just curious, was there a desire to get away from television and focus on film? And do you guys have any desire to go back to television at some point? Not necessarily Spaced, but...
I think you always were always going to be a film director. That was, I mean, very clear from the way that you directed Spaced. Spaced needed to look like a film because it was like people living small lives in big ways, you know, and it required this great cinematic grandeur which Edgar had in Spaced. And I think you were never going to stay in TV for long, were you, Edgar?
Well, I think there was something I loved doing Spaced, but there was something, it was very sort of aspirational in a way, like kind of the characters would kind of like live through the fancy of film and stuff. But I think one of the reasons it was when we like did the scene in Spaced Series 1 with the zombies that like, I remember being in a cab with Simon after we finished filming. We were going for a drink and said, oh, we should do a whole film of that, but what would it be? How would we do it? And like, we literally didn't think, we talked about it there and we chewed on it for a very long time. But I think one of the things is when you're making like a TV show, even though, and this I'm nothing against TV, and I would return to TV in like some capacity.
It's different now, isn't it?
Yeah, but also there's something about like making movies is that you can actually, in sitcoms, you kind of always have to return to the status quo. People have to kind of get back to that, things have to pretty much come back to normal so you can have another episode. And the great thing about doing like a film like Shaun of the Dead is that you can kill off half of the cast and not have to worry about next week. It can have, and and you know, like especially like in this movie in Shaun of the Dead, and even like Hot Fuzz is like the world changes like for everybody, and they come through like a big arc. And this movie is like they can never go back, you know. And it's almost that thing of like trying to come up with endings that are very final, that have hints of future adventures that you'll never see. It's like those, you know, kind of if you think, oh, maybe there's more you can do with the story, that it's better for that to live on in people's imagination. So the thing of doing the films for us is actually sort of doing something where you can tell a bigger story, where you don't actually, you can have an ending and not have to worry about what happens next week.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, I think as an actor, I'd always, you know, I'd rather do something good, be it on telly. That, you know, I'd rather do good telly than a shit film. And I think in this kind of day and age where it's getting harder and harder to get things green lit, a lot of people are moving over to do more short form. And I just did a sitcom. I just made a sitcom with Bob Wiley, who did Curb Your Enthusiasm. So I think that'll come out next year sometime. So, sorry?
Say again, little boy?
He also directed the film How to Lose Friends and Alien People. So yeah, I mean, look, I mean, it seems daft to just close yourself off and say no. If something's good, then something's good on whatever platform, little boy.
I think also Nick's right. You know, the television now has changed vastly from how it was. Particularly, I mean, you know, you look at a show like Breaking Bad. That's a show that is doing what Edgar was just talking about over. Yeah, big man. I love that show. It's doing it over a long period of time. You know, it's by the time that show finishes in a couple of weeks, you know, everything will have changed. But it's taken 5 years to do it. But I just did a pilot for Frank Darabont called Mob City, which is coming out at the end of the year. I think that's going to be great. I was just a one-off, but it was a joy, and it was like, you know, to get to work with Frank, who's an esteemed writer and film director, who is now doing great stuff on TV. And that's you know, American television particularly is extremely impressive. You look at Game of Thrones or Breaking Bad, or I mean, it's just exemplary. And I think as film becomes more, you know, these films are getting bigger and bigger because the markets are changing, and a lot of the serious acting is migrating towards television. So absolutely, it's becoming. It might have even already won the war. I don't know. It's an interesting landscape. What a down ending.
I think we're going to have one more question, trying to get like a pithy one. Mr. in the middle.
Get pithy.
What's the next trilogy going to be?
Well,
Pith off.
I think like we, you know, we want to. This is a good note. We do want to work together again. We do want to make these films like a trilogy. Like it's like what do you say? It's like the Shankara stones.
Yeah, I mean, individually as films, they look really beautiful, but if you put them together, they kind of glow. You can kill a fat ear on a rope bridge. You can burn for a canvas bag. If you get the 3 DVDs, if you buy the 3 DVDs, transport them separately, okay? So they come together, they will burn a hole in your bag.
We like to think that the 3 films separately are like Kelly, Michelle, and Beyonce, but together they are Destiny's Child.
And end of the laugh. Thank you, good night.
Please put your hands together.
We do want to show you a little something just before you go, so stay in your seats, because this is something that's going to go online later this week, but this amazing mashup artist, Mike Realm, did an amazing 3-minute potted version of the 3 movies, which I think you would enjoy. So check this out, and thank you very much.
Thank you.